This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Today on the Saturday Breakfast Show, we are talking about dual coding. It's a fact that is coming back round time and time again, but we're going to look at it in terms of cognitive load. How do we kind of balance the two? How do we merge them? How do we make sure that we can use dual coding to really get the best out of our pupils?
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
A very good morning to you. Happy Saturday to all. Today is Saturday, the 21st of September, 2024. We are now officially in autumn. It wouldn't be Saturday breakfast if I didn't announce that. You guys know that I like the changing of the seasons, especially now as we move into autumn and winter, which are my favourite seasons of the year. And this is proving to be a particularly autumnal day. We had, all of a sudden, yesterday afternoon, we had a storm move in. Probably the most intense spouts of thunder and lightning that I've ever seen in England, certainly, which was really, really exciting. Then it kind of disappeared. It was here for about an hour and a half, and then it moved away. But the storm seems to have come back today, albeit with no thunder and lightning, but we do have quite a lot of rain, which is my favorite type of weather. So I have kind of gone all out a little bit today to embrace the autumn season. It is only 9 a.m, but I've got a candle burning. I have got some nice soft mood lighting going on. We are getting cozy here on Saturday morning breakfast because we like to be cozy, because it has been a long week, it has been a hectic week, and so it is always nice just to take some downtime. So that's kind of my first message for you all today, especially now that we've come to the end of the first 2-3 weeks back at school, kind of almost at the halfway point of the first half term, almost, not quite, but almost. So do just make sure that you are taking enough time for yourself, enough time to recharge, enough time to do things that bring you joy, because as the old cliche goes, you cannot pour from an empty jug. And we have all sorts of people relying on us. We have our pupils, of course, we have our colleagues, but more importantly, we have our own family, we have our friends. And, in some cases they may overlap. There may be parent-child teaching combos in a school. You may be very, very good friends with some of your colleagues. But yeah, just make sure that you are prioritizing what is important. I've been thinking about that a lot over the past couple of weeks, about where our priorities are, where my priorities are. And kind of about how time slips away quite quickly. So we are going to kind of start with quite a sad announcement this morning. Those of you who have been listening to the Saturday Breakfast Show since I took over a couple of years ago, you will have encountered Tuppence, who is one of my cats, and was always very intrigued on a Saturday morning by who I was talking to. The room that I do the show in was the one room in the house that she was never allowed into, and she was always so intrigued and so curious about it, intrigued by it and curious about it. And then even more so when I kind of shut myself in here and started talking. So she would sit at the door and she would mew. She just wanted to take part. She wanted to be a colleague. She wanted to be involved. Unfortunately, we lost her a couple of weeks ago. That was the big awful event that I alluded to in that very annoying social media way at the end of the first week of term. The only reason that I was very vague about it was that I couldn't talk about it. She had kidney failure. Ultimately, which I have now learned, I didn't know, but I have now learned, is a big cause of death in cats and dogs. So just be aware of that. Just be aware of your pets as they are getting older, about how much they are drinking. And if they start drinking an abnormal amount, that's probably a good time to get them checked out, because that could be the beginning of it, or at least the beginning of the vets being able to detect it. So yeah, unfortunately, we did lose Tuppence a couple of weeks ago, which is why for the past 2 weeks there has been no mewing here at the studio. She came home yesterday. We had her cremated. An amazing service. I must commend our vet and the crematorium for what they did, because she came home in a very beautiful urn, which itself was packed in a very beautiful box with a copy of her paw prints and with a very lovely card from the vet that was signed by everybody at their office. And her urn is lovely. It's a very little box. I can't get over how small it is, considering she was quite a chunky cat. With her name, it's a beautiful wooden box, and then her name is engraved on a metal front piece. So they did an amazing job. They did an amazing job with her. So yeah, I did kind of want to. I wasn't going to talk about it on the show, because I do know that pet death can be a trigger for many people, and when this goes up in the podcast, I'm going to pop a trigger warning on for these first few minutes. But I think she was, for me, as much a part of Saturday morning breakfast as all of the other kind of little routines that we have around here. My heart sinking whenever she would start mewing, because I wasn't sure if she was being picked up on mic. And then, of course, now I'm glad that she was, because we will always have that those recordings of her, that legacy of her, I suppose. And then whenever I couldn't quite concentrate properly because her mewing was distracting me from what I was actually trying to talk about. So yeah, I did think it was appropriate to memorialize her here today. And that, of course, is why I've been thinking a lot about time, about how it slips, about care, about making sure that we are doing right by the people and the animals that we love, and making sure that at all points in time, even if they can be frustrating, even if the situations that we are in are not the best, making sure that we do our future selves a favor by creating good memories with them at every point. Tim has texted in good morning to you. Tim, of course, as I introduce him every week, because he is our best commentator, our best contributor here at Saturday Morning Breakfast. Tim has said, I'm going to say it, Tuppence was my favourite guest. I mean, that's a big claim considering you've been a guest on the show twice. So, I am sure she would very much appreciate that. And given her sassy nature, Tuppence was a funny one. She was dual coded, strangely enough. She was very sweet and very loving, but she was also incredibly sassy. And so I think Sassy Tuppence would say, yes, obviously, I was the favourite guest. And I'm not gonna lie, she was a very, very good one. I think all of my future guests have got a lot to live up to. Tuppence, of course, is not the only pet that we have here at Saturday Breakfast. There are two more cats in the house. They are less likely to make an appearance, quite honestly, than Tuppence was, only because they're a lot lazier. So they are quite often asleep at this time of the morning. And I think, having pets around, having animals around is a very good way to have life in a house, to have companionship for people, and to kind of give back because, as we've domesticated these animals, it would be very difficult for them to survive without us. So I think it's a good way to make sure that they have long, comfortable, happy lives. And of course, that is not just happening in homes. I've noticed, and I know that Joe is going to talk about this in the news in a couple of minutes' time, so I'm not going to kind of tread on her toes too much. But I have noticed over the past couple of years the increase in school pets. I think probably as a response to COVID, and as a response to trauma. Schools are beginning increasingly to have animals on site. Something, things for the children to interact with, to make them calm. My favourite actually was something that popped up on my Twitter feed yesterday, and that is Billy. Now, again, I know that Billy is going to feature in the news, so I'm not gonna give too much away right now. But Billy is actually employed by a school. He has a lanyard and everything, and he is this specific school's emotional support tortoise. Which I think is an amazing job title. And it makes me think about there is this one particular train station in Japan that employs a cat as its conductor. And, there has been this long, long line of cats who have been the conductors there. And the very first one, she was actually elevated to the to the role of goddess. She underwent apotheosis and is now considered to be a goddess, a protectress of the shrine of this specific train station. So, animals can have a really lasting effect on a space, on a place, as well as on a person. And I do think that it's quite an interesting thing for schools to think about. Do they want a school pet? Is there going to be, I'm going to say school mascot, but I don't mean mascot in an exploitative sense. I mean mascot, I suppose, in the sense of the Spanish word mascota, which just means pet, where, it is kind of an emblem, I suppose, of the school. Now, obviously, there are all kinds of conversations to be had about whether it is right for schools to have animals, about the type of animal that is chosen because of allergies, because of phobias. There are whole shows and whole conversations to be had around this. But I think as we think about humanizing the school experience, as we think about making sure that schools are a kind, welcoming, caring place for our children. You know, as we think about trying to make our schools a place that the children want to go to in order to battle this issue that we are having with attendance, this is probably a conversation that we are going to have and that we're going to keep having, because we understand the role of animals in supporting and improving mental health. We understand the roles of service animals in hospitals. We understand the roles of therapy animals. And so it will be quite interesting to see whether that is a concept that is brought into schools over the next few years. So I'm just going to say to anybody who is listening, we're now kind of ending this section on pets. There will be no more after this. There will be no more reference to pet death. So the kind of the potentially triggering section of the show does end here, but this show is for Tuppence. We are doing today's show in memoriam of her, and of all the pets that we have lost, because they play such an important role in our lives.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Introducing Reading Solutions UK. Home to Dreambox Reading Plus, the online reading development programme, improving outcomes for students and schools nationwide. Create stronger readers in your school from Key Stage 2 to beyond GCSE, using Reading Plus's evidence-based adaptive technology. Reading Plus accurately assesses your students' skills gaps and places them on a personalised learning pathway, built to accelerate their strengths and improve on their areas for development. You can try the programme with a free 4-week pilot today. Search Reading Solutions UK to find their website and request your free pilot today.
How can you show your students the opportunities that await them? How can you fuel their aspirations and motivate them to achieve? Futurum Careers provides a wealth of stimulating resources aimed at encouraging 14 to 19-year-olds to pursue careers in STEM and SHAPE. We help you to show your students what they can aim for and how. From articles to activity sheets, animations to podcasts, all our resources align with Gatsby benchmarks and are free for you and your students to download. Visit futurumcareers.com and subscribe today. Futurum Careers, helping teachers to inspire the next generation.
Get set for the year ahead with the Bloomsbury Education Back to School sale. Save 30% on all Bloomsbury education books until 30th September. From the very best in research-led practice to trusted advice on inclusivity, behaviour and curriculum design, we've got something for everyone. Visit bloomsbury.com/B2S sale to shop now and save 30%. Bloomsbury Education, books for every step of your teaching journey.
Teachers, mark your calendars for BetUK 2025, the world's biggest EdTech event. Join over 30,000 educators at the Excel London from the 22nd to the 24th of January. Discover the latest EdTech innovations, network with peers and access hundreds of hours of CPD. Did we mention it's 100% free for educators? Whether you're looking for inspiration or practical tools to enhance your teaching, BET has it all. Don't miss this opportunity to shape the future of education. Register today at uk.betshow.com. That's uk.betshow.com.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
Two linked stories feature on the BBC News website. The first is an in-depth piece on tuition fees and government funding for higher education, with 141 UK universities now calling for change. Whilst many universities have previously made comments on the funding crisis, the BBC Today programme says Universities UK is now saying that a rise in tuition fees and more government investment is needed so that the sector does not slide into decline. This comes as record numbers of home students begin courses this month, but the number of international students is down. About 40% of universities are expecting to return a budget deficit this year, according to the regulator, the Office for Students. Universities UK says that if investment in teaching students had kept up with inflation funding per student, it would be in the region of £12,000 to £13,000. Higher Education Policy Institute says it would be politically difficult to put up fees, but there needs to be a decision about funding. Changes to visa rules and a currency crash in Nigeria have reduced applications for students from abroad. Whilst the cost of living crisis means students now need about £18,000 a year to live on, but the maximum loan amount is £10,000. The full Today programme is available on BBC Sounds. Meanwhile, another story is the amount of debt graduates are leaving university with. The BBC focuses on those graduates who took out loans in England and Wales between 2012 and 2023, when interest rates hit 8%. The article tells the story of graduate Adam, who borrowed £44,000 and has paid back £7,000 since graduating 4 years ago, but now owes £54,000. Despite having a good job, his salary isn't even covering the interest on the debt, and the amount is going up, not down. This situation predominantly affects those on Plan 2 loans, with some graduates reporting that the repayments are making applying for mortgages difficult, and others viewing it as a tax on graduates. The Save the Student campaign group says it could, but shouldn't, put students off. Whichever way we look at it, it seems the issues of funding, tuition fees and student loans are something the government will need to tackle, although a Department for Education spokesperson acknowledged it's going to take time to get it right. In the world of online technology, something many young people use regularly, Instagram has said it is overhauling the way it works for teenagers. In a press release, it promised more built-in protections for young people and said it had added controls for parents. The new teen accounts have been introduced in the UK, as well as the US, Canada and Australia. This means privacy settings will be activated by default for all under 18s, including making content unviewable for people who don't follow them, and actively require approval for all new followers. Children aged 13 to 15 will only be able to adjust these settings by adding a parent or guardian to their account. The UK children's charity, the NSPCC, responded to Instagram's announcement by calling it a step in the right direction, but said it must also be backed up by proactive measures that prevent harmful content in the first place. Further details of this story can be found online. The Guardian reports on school uniforms in France. Uniforms have not been compulsory in state schools in France since 1968. They have made a return in one town to establish if they can reduce inequality and improve behaviour. The school uniform debate has long been a focus of discussion in the UK and has sometimes been seen as something of a polarising topic. In France, 700 pupils at 4 schools in Béziers are taking part in the scheme that the government says could be rolled out nationwide, if it is successful. A French government minister said, "We would like to see if wearing a uniform can create tranquility in classrooms, because we know you learn better in a peaceful environment." The mayor of Béziers said uniforms would help combat bullying, but a teachers' union said it was a superficial response to a fundamental problem and would in no way help resolve troubles. Some parents have objected to the uniform, saying that public schools should not ape the worst excesses of private schools. This was written in an open letter of protest. Uniforms were first introduced in France in 1802 by Napoleon, but have not been compulsory since 1968. Whatever the outcome of the pilot, it seems clear that the topic of uniform is a hot one. Finally, BBC Leicester covers the story of Billy, the emotional support tortoise. who can be found working in a Leicestershire school. Billy, aged 11, wanders the corridors and has a heart-shaped balloon attached to his shell so students can see him coming. He's described as a calming presence who works in the school's learning support department, helping students who are feeling overwhelmed. Billy has his own lanyard carrying his photo and his official title. He works hard to support pupils by being lovely, fun and cute. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
The school uniform debate in France is quite interesting to me as a French teacher, because it's one of the things that, when you introduce French to the pupils whenever they start, and you look at the differences between the UK and France, and you talk about how in France they don't have uniform. The kids are always so shocked by that. It's always, oh, they're so lucky. Oh, I wish we didn't have uniform. And it promotes such an interesting discussion amongst the children. But what I've always found interesting is how, in my mind, as an English person, one of the things that the uniform does is promote equality. One of the reasons that we justify having school uniform is so that it doesn't make particularly financial inequality more apparent, so that you don't have kids turning up to school in designer jackets and shoes that cost more than their head teacher's car did, and all of that sort of thing. And then the children whose families can't afford those things feeling inadequate. And of course, this concept of equality, égalité in French, is so important to the French. It's one of their three core values, I suppose you could call it, as a country. And yet there is this fierce resistance to uniform. And I will be interested, kind of as this experiment in Béziers continues, I will be interested to see what the response is. I'll be interested to see particularly what the people who are against the uniform are saying. Are they arguing against it because it's tradition? We don't have uniform in this country, and so we don't want it back. Or are there legitimate arguments not to introduce it? I do think it will be fascinating to see this debate from the opposite side. And instead of talking about, why we should abolish uniform like we do in this country, to see people justifying bringing it in. And I think it'll be interesting to see how that adds to the uniform discussion here in the UK. But that is not what we are talking about today. Today we are talking about dual coding. We are talking about this process of presenting our learners with new information in two completely different formats in order to improve learning, to improve retention of the information, to improve that transition from short-term to long-term memory. Usually, when we dual code, we do this visually and auditorily. We do it through visuals and through some kind of speech, something that they can listen to. Now, I can hear the seasoned teachers in my audience going, oh no, he's going to start talking about VAC. VAC is coming back. No. And I think that's really important to express right at the beginning of this discussion, because I'm not going to lie, that was my concern when I first encountered dual coding as a concept rather than just as something that we do in the classroom. When I learned about it as a theory, I thought, oh, okay, we're going back to learning styles. We're going back to this idea that people only learn in one way, and all of that nonsense that that, as I like to point out, had already been discredited before I was being taught about it at university as the way that we should be teaching. So no, VAC is not coming back. For those of you in the audience who are not teachers, because I know that not everybody who listens to Saturday Breakfast Show is a teacher, VAC was the visual, auditory, and kinesthetic learning theory. So those of you of a certain age, by which I include myself, may have been told in school that you were a visual learner, you were an auditory learner, you were a kinesthetic learner. You may have done a little quiz, kind of like the same that you used to get in magazines, where you ticked a box and then the number of A's that you ticked. If you ticked A for most of the answers, you were a visual learner, and if you ticked B, you were an auditory learner, and if you ticked C, you were a kinesthetic learner. As a teacher, let's be honest, you may still be administering those tests in tutor time, even though we know that the theory isn't true. But that has long been debunked. That has long been disregarded in educational theory as being far too simplistic, because we know it is. We know that it's too simplistic. You can have a learning preference, and quite often when the children would latch onto VAC and they would say, oh, I'm a visual learner, or I'm a kinesthetic learner, that was a preference rather than a, this is actually how I learn best. Quite often, let's be honest, it was used as a way for the kids who like to be up and about and moving around to be up and about and moving around. And it was a way for the kids who liked to just sit and kind of go unnoticed at the back of the classroom, very quiet, not very disruptive. You know, if they could say, oh, I'm a visual learner, then they could be justified by being given a worksheet rather than getting up and joining in with the experiment. So we are not going back to VAC. We're not making a return to that. That's not what dual coding is saying. What dual coding is saying is actually the opposite, the polar opposite of this. And it's saying that actually the best way for us to learn is through a multi-sensory experience. The best way for us to retain information, the best way for the human brain to process information is to have it in multiple different media, in multiple different formats. To me, that's just common sense. To me, that is common sense. Now, I do have a preference. My preference is for physical reading. My preference is to have a book with an explanation of something in front of me so that I can read it, because that helps me to process it. But I also understand, and I've come to understand through my own studies, that actually one of the things that I do like to do with my books is annotate them and make notes and write things down, because it is that kinesthetic, that physical process of writing that helps me to think. I do kind of think best on paper. Now, for all of the bibliophiles in the audience who may be horrified at the idea of me writing on my books, because as you know, we are big literature lovers here at Saturday Morning Breakfast, please rest assured I have discovered transparent sticky notes, and they are the best thing ever. Because that way you can annotate a book, you can underline things in the book, you can highlight your book without actually writing on the book. You can just stick your transparent sticky notes over whatever it is you are annotating and write on that instead. It's brilliant. Tim has texted in. Apparently, it looks like transparent sticky notes are a revelation to him. So yes, they are a thing. They do exist. They are amazing. If any transparent sticky note makers are listening and would like to sponsor us here at Saturday Morning Breakfast, please do get in touch, because we will be more than happy. So yeah, even though my preference is reading information, I understand that it's the kinesthetic act of writing that helps me to process, that helps me to think. So, you know, this is one of the ways in which we know that learning styles is in fact learning preferences, and it's the way that we understand that it does take more than one way of processing information in order for everything to make its way into our heads. Presenting information using multiple diverse stimuli can help to learners encode, store, and retrieve that information much more effectively from their long-term memory. So it's about efficacy. And that's what we want, isn't it? Let's be honest. We want to make sure that our learners remember what we are teaching them. That's the whole point of our job. Okay, is to find the best ways to facilitate the remembering, the retrieval of that information. And dual coding can help to do that. As a theory, dual coding was developed by a man named Alan Pivio in 1986. So dual coding is an educational theory that is 1 year younger than I am. Not happy about that. I like educational theories to be older than me, but there you go. So Alan Pivio proposed an idea that verbal information and visual information are encoded in the long-term memory through two completely separate processes. And his theory posits that learning improves when the information is presented in these two forms simultaneously. I guess because that way your brain is encoding the information twice through the two separate processes, and so is kind of remembering it twice. So it's getting like double the amount of input, I suppose, is the best way to put that. Consequently, Pivio went on to become a very strong advocate for multimedia learning, combining verbal and non-verbal stimuli, by which we mean something like an annotated diagram. So when we're saying verbal, we don't always mean out loud speech. Okay, we are talking, and I'll talk a little bit more about this. We'll define our terms a bit more concretely in a minute, but we are basically saying words and pictures. That's kind of where we're going for. Do you remember growing up and you kind of made that transition from picture books to chapter books, and it was like you were maturing because you were no longer reading books with illustrations? It's kind of about going back from that, coming away from this idea that an illustration is a simplistic, is a babyish way of presenting information, and understanding that your brain does in fact need words and pictures. It needs that multimodal approach in order to best process. I was in a meeting yesterday where somebody asked about alt text in images in exams. And alt text for images actually is another interesting example of dual coding. So in case you're not sure, alt text is what happens when you have an image on a website, and then you also have a piece of text describing what that image looks like. And what that is for screen reading software that is used for visually impaired people. They can then have a description of the image kind of read out to them, because the software that is being used recognizes the text that is kind of embedded in the picture, that those of us who are not using that software can't see, and they have that text read out to them. But actually, I was thinking about this kind of yesterday in the meeting while I was also thinking about the show. Alt text is another good way of dual coding, because you can have the picture, you can have the painting, and you have a written description, a verbal description of what that picture is. So it's just about the multimodality of text. It's about bringing these two things together. So we know that that dual coding was developed by this guy, Alan Pivio, but why should we listen to him? This is something that I think is always quite interesting. You know, what does Alan have to say? Why should Alan be believed? Because quite often, you know, we get these theories and we get these we get these education experts coming in, and they're telling us what we should do and what we should think. But it can sometimes be quite hard to follow their credentials and to understand how and why they know what they know. So Pivio, interestingly, was a Canadian psychologist. So it was his bread and butter to understand the brain, to understand the processes of thinking. He was born in Ontario. He earned his PhD in psychology from McGill University and went on to become a professor at the University of Western Ontario, which was where he conducted most of his research. His body of work tended to focus on this idea of dual coding and how we use words and images simultaneously to process information, and how that can be used to improve memory and learning. He also did research more widely in memory and in imagery and in cognitive process. And throughout his career, he published numerous books and articles on these things. So because I think when you get somebody who is just a massive proponent of one theory and their whole work is about this one theory and it's kind of their baby, that can also be quite hard to justify, because of course they're going to want you to follow their theory because they've put all of their research into it. It's a kind of all their eggs in one basket deal. Whereas I think if you have got somebody like Pivio who has got a broader range of publication within the domain. So he published a lot about memory, about imagery, about cognitive processing. And then they turn around and say, I think that this theory has value. To me, that's more valuable. To me, that's more believable, I suppose, because you can see that they have done the wider research and the wider publication around it and kind of distilled that information down, as opposed almost to going the other way and saying, you know, I've come up with this theory, you know, I want to use it to make my name, and so I'm going to publish about it. So for me, this is why I can say, yeah, I actually think that dual coding is a decent theory, because I've looked into who Pivio was. I've done my research into his research, and I'm thinking that actually, yes, he does have a broad understanding of what he is talking about. And I talk about this on the show quite often, that sometimes, particularly in our society, we tend to prioritize depth over breadth. And we tend to ignore the fact that you can know about lots of things really, really well. And so the fact that Pivio does, and he was able to kind of tie all of these different things together into one cohesive theory, that works for me as a justification for buying into dual coding. It might not work for everybody, you know, and this is why all of our classrooms are so different, because we all have our own reasons for buying into a theory, for thinking that a theory holds water, and we can only do what is best for us and best within our own careers.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Introducing Reading Solutions UK. Home to Dreambox Reading Plus, the online reading development program, improving outcomes for students and schools nationwide. Create stronger readers in your school from Key Stage 2 to beyond GCSE, using Reading Plus's evidence-based adaptive technology. Reading Plus accurately assesses your students' skills gaps and places them on a personalised learning pathway, built to accelerate their strengths and improve on their areas for development. You can try the programme with a free 4-week pilot today. Search Reading Solutions UK to find their website and request your free pilot today.
How can you show your students the opportunities that await them? How can you fuel their aspirations and motivate them to achieve? Futurum Careers provides a wealth of stimulating resources aimed at encouraging 14 to 19-year-olds to pursue careers in STEM and SHAPE. We help you to show your students what they can aim for and how. From articles to activity sheets, animations to podcasts, all our resources align with Gatsby benchmarks and are free for you and your students to download. Visit futurumcareers.com and subscribe today. Futurum Careers, helping teachers to inspire the next generation.
Get set for the year ahead with the Bloomsbury Education Back to School sale. Save 30% on all Bloomsbury education books until 30th September. From the very best in research-led practice to trusted advice on inclusivity, behaviour and curriculum design, we've got something for everyone. Visit bloomsbury.com/B2S sale to shop now and save 30%. Bloomsbury Education, books for every step of your teaching journey.
Teachers, mark your calendars for BetUK 2025, the world's biggest EdTech event. Join over 30,000 educators at the Excel London from the 22nd to the 24th of January. Discover the latest EdTech innovations, network with peers and access hundreds of hours of CPD. Did we mention it's 100% free for educators? Whether you're looking for inspiration or practical tools to enhance your teaching, BET has it all. Don't miss this opportunity to shape the future of education. Register today at uk.betshow.com. That's uk.betshow.com.
So one of the things that concerned me about dual coding, and has concerned me about dual coding for a little while, is its intersect with cognitive load. I talk about cognitive load quite a lot here on Saturday Morning Breakfast because I do think it's very important. And it's one of those kind of foundational theories that when I first read about it, when I learned about it, I was like, yes, that is true. That is true in my experience. So in case you're not sure, cognitive load theory is about how our brain processes information and how much information can be processed at one time. And I want you to think, as a quick illustration, I want you to think of a time where you've seen maybe a poster, or you've seen a website, or you have seen an advert for something, and you thought, oh, that's a little bit busy. And your eye has been drawn to all sorts of different places all at once. There's too much on that site, on that page, on that whatever you're looking at, competing for your attention. That's giving you cognitive overload because your brain is trying to process too much information at once. And cognitive overload, interestingly, can happen in much simpler ways than we might think. So, I've just described an incredibly busy poster or, an incredibly busy website, whatever it is you've just visualized for me. But if you think about an exam paper, which is often in black and white, maybe with a picture on, even that can be cognitively overloading, because the different ways that the text can be laid out, the different things that are going on even within text boxes. If you've got a text box that has got some shading in, that's something for your brain to process. So it is quite easy, I think, to cognitively overload somebody. And one of the issues that I've always had with dual coding theory, in theory, that is Pearl, who apparently would like to join in and make herself known this morning. Very ironic after what we were talking about at the top of the show. What was I saying? Yeah. So one of the reasons that I was a little bit concerned about dual coding was that it might be cognitively overloading. That having both pictures and text, having a visual and an auditory stimulus in one place, might be too much for the brain to process. Now, the reason that this cognitive overload happens is because of that transfer of information. So cognitive load theory states that working memory processes and transfers information consciously through to the long-term memory via repetition, elaboration, and encoding to a pre-existing schema. So it hooks onto something that is already there in your brain. It's the reason that we try and find these hooks for our learners. It's the reason that we try and make these links between concepts and ideas. It's so that we can take advantage of cognitive load theory and we can facilitate that transfer. But the working memory contains multiple different stores that process information from different modalities. So one of the issues with cognitive load theory, or one of the issues, that cognitive load theory makes us aware of, is the fact that your brain is processing information that may not be relevant to what you are actually wanting your learner to learn. Now, this came up once in an observation that I had. I had a really nice PowerPoint that I had, quite honestly, I'd just stolen from somebody else. I think I downloaded it from the TES. It was a Japanese lesson that I was teaching, and part of the PowerPoint had a little animation of a lady, and she would pop up every so often in the corner, and there would be a speech bubble that came up, and the Japanese hiragana, a Japanese letter, would kind of appear out of her speech bubble, and then she'd disappear again. And I kind of noted that on the PowerPoint, and I thought it was fun. I thought the kids would quite like it, so I kept it. But in the observation feedback that I got, the person who observed me pointed out that this little lady who was popping up in the corner, she served no purpose for the lesson. And all she was doing was detracting the students' attention away from what I was talking about and onto her. And so that was kind of the first time that I really started to think about cognitive load. It was many, many years ago, back before this became a whole thing in education, and where I started to think about how sometimes the visuals that we use with our learners in order to make something engaging, in order to make something fun to look at, fun to do, actually detracts from the learning. And of course, it's the learning that is the point of being in school. So for me, that was quite an interesting perception, an interesting realization coming from that other teacher's perception, that this little lady popping up on my PowerPoint was a bit distracting. And that then kind of led me down this whole cognitive load theory rabbit hole. But because the brain processes these different modalities differently at the same time, because the brain processes visual and auditory stimuli at the same time but through two different pathways, it means that if your picture and your text, if your PowerPoint slide and your speech are referring to the same thing, and they are complementing each other instead of one of them just being there because it looks pretty, the brain is processing that information in two different ways. It's seeing the same information twice. So we're getting through everything twice as fast, essentially. So Pavio kind of looked at the visual and the auditory spheres of dual coding in obviously two very different ways. For visual, he came up with this idea of a visual spatial sketchpad. I was really worried about saying visuospatial when I was planning this show, and I'm quite impressed with myself that that I got that out. I don't know whether he was the one that coined the term visuospatial. See, now that I know that I can say it, I'm just going to say it all the time. Or whether this was a pre-existing idea that he jumped on. But essentially, your visuospatial sketchpad is the part of your brain that processes information such as image, color, and relativity of objects. So again, when we are thinking about the visual aspects of cognitive load, and when we're thinking about the visual aspects of dual coding, we're not just thinking about the layout of a text. We're not just thinking about what is on a PowerPoint slide, but we're thinking about all of the visual information that is being processed. And this is why we're getting many schools now going for, no displays, going for white walls to kind of reduce the amount of information that is being processed at once. As teachers, we are quite often told to think about where we are in the classroom, and that's usually done from a behavior management point of view. If you've got two people who are whispering in the back, instead of stopping your lesson to tell them stop talking, you just go and stand next to them and you carry on teaching, because your proximity will probably stop them from talking. But one of the other reasons why it's important for you to think about your placement in the classroom is because of your pupils' visuospatial sketchpad. Because even if they're not doing it consciously, while they are in your classroom, they are processing everything that's going on around them. So do you need to be part of that processing or not? Is it a good idea for you to stand at the back of the classroom, away from your board, so that their focus is on the PowerPoint slide that is on your board and not on your really jazzy tie or your lovely socks? Now, of course, that's going to depend on the space that's available to you and the needs of your learners. If you've got a learner who needs to lip read, then of course you're not going to go and stand at the back of your classroom. But all of these things are being processed at once. Remember, everything that you perceive is being processed by your brain. And what we really need to do is think about where we want our learners' attention to be. What is the most important thing in our classroom at that moment? And quite often it is whatever is up on our board or whatever is on their worksheet. So that's your I was doing so well. Your visuospatial sketchpad. That's your processing of all visual information. Then we talk about the articulatory loop. So this is the store that processes speech and sound and your inner voice when you are reading or writing. So again, notice that we are not back to visual and auditory. We're not back to words and pictures, even though that's kind of what I said we were doing at the top, because your articulatory loop is anything that is words-based. Now, some research that I've read calls this the phonological loop, but I don't like that, because to me as a linguist, phonological implies spoken speech. It implies sound, whereas that's not actually what this loop is about. The loop is about anything that is words. So again, what you've got going on is your visuospatial sketchpad looking at the pictures, processing all of that meaning, processing all of the symbolism of whatever is on your board. And then you've got your articulatory loop processing your teacher talking, processing the instructions to the task, processing the page on the book. Why do picture books have pictures, and it's because of this dual coding. One of the things, when I did a course on children's literature at university, one of the texts that we studied was really interesting because the pictures didn't match the text. The pictures that were on the page had supplementary information, had more information than what we were given in the text. So they created a more immersive reading experience for the children. But one of the reasons that was notable on this course was because quite often what happens in picture books is you have a lovely, beautiful illustration of what the words are saying. And they do that because of the dual coding process. They do that so that the children who are reading these books, experiencing these books for the first time, can make the link between the story that they're hearing and the pictures that they're seeing to give them a better understanding of what's going on. And from a cultural capital point of view, that's really important. Let's take Little Red Riding Hood as an example, classic fairy tale. How likely is it that the reception child in your class, this 4-year-old, has seen a wolf in real life? Unless they are regular visitors to the zoo, which they might be, it is highly unlikely that they will have seen one. But a picture in a picture book can help them to make that link between what a wolf looks like and that word wolf, that concept of wolf, that whole semantic identity of what a wolf is. And both of those things, the picture and the word and all of the connotations surrounding the word, they are processed along the two different streams, so that 4-year-old really intensifies their understanding of what a wolf is. And this is why I think all the times that we say that children progress from picture books into chapter books, from books with illustrations to books without illustrations, I think it's a misnomer to say that they are progressing. Because yes, the books that they read are longer, they are more lexically dense, but they're actually having something taken away from them. They're having a process removed, which is not to say that I think all books should now be illustrated, but I do think that there is a gap in the market. Any publishers who are listening, I can write. I can't draw to save my life, but I can write. So get in touch. We can come up with something. But I do think there is a gap in the market for more middle grade and young adult, and to be honest, even adult books with pictures to kind of help this. To help the immersion into the story, but also the didactic nature of the story to help with the learning. Now, dual coding theory, in a nutshell, I've told you about, I've explained to you what it is. We have got a visual stimulus and we have got a linguistic stimulus, be that spoken or thoughts or words that are already on a page or words that the students are producing. And having both of those things, having the visual and the auditory, in inverted commas, having the pictures and the words, helps the brain to process along both of its tracks, and so helps that information to sink in better. And that is, in essence, what dual coding is. But the reason that I think it's so effective as a theory is because there is more. There's more than Alan had in mind when he coined this idea, because it allows for the integration of information from two stores, as we've just talked about. It allows for your visual and your auditory. It allows for your words and your pictures to combine to create a bigger sense of what something is. It helps you to recall relevant information from the long-term memory, which, again, as we've discussed, helps with that hook. It helps you to hang one set of information onto something else, and it helps you to direct your attention to the appropriate store. Now, what's really interesting, if we come back to cognitive overload, like we talked about just now, is this kind of idea that goes against common sense. And it was one of those things where I was reading the research and I had to keep reminding myself, these researchers know better than I do about this, because it does seem to not make sense. But you are actually cognitively overloaded more if you get your information just from one stimulus as opposed to two. So if you have someone who is just sitting and delivering a lecture with no visual stimuli at all, you are going to be more cognitively overloaded by that than if the lecture was given with a PowerPoint, with some slides, with some visual information. Now, again, that seems counterintuitive because your brain is processing two completely different things at the same time. But remember, the brain is processing these two things along two different tracks. It's processing the picture along your visuospatial sketchpad, and it's processing the words through the articulatory loop. So what you don't have is the overloading of just one of those processes. Okay, it's kind of split among the two. The benefits of dual coding, according to a 2016 study by Smith and Weinstein, was that dual coding leads to greater comprehension and to deeper understanding, which is what we want as teachers. That's what we are going for. That's what we are looking for in our classroom. They found that the additional detail received by students through the combination of verbal and non-verbal information helps them to assimilate the new knowledge with related prior learning, which then increases their understanding of the new material. It's all of the stuff that we have talked about up until this point. A 2014 study by Mayer reported better learning outcomes and retention for information presented along two modes. That was because it was more likely for the information to be stored correctly in the long-term memory. So we've got this idea that actually presenting information with visual and auditory stimuli, and remember, I'm going to keep repeating myself with this point just to really drive it home. When I say auditory, that can include the written word. There's less likely to be misunderstanding because your brain is processing it twice. And so it's more likely to remember it correctly. If you ask for instructions and somebody if you ask for directions, let's say you need to get to the train station, you ask somebody for directions and they just give you a list of directions, you are less likely to remember that than if they give you a list of directions and they do some hand movements, because you are processing those directions in two completely different ways. So combining the two modalities is a real benefit to our students, and is something that we really ought to be thinking of a lot more in our lessons.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Introducing Reading Solutions UK, home to Dreambox Reading Plus, the online reading development programme, improving outcomes for students and schools nationwide. Create stronger readers in your school from Key Stage 2 to beyond GCSE, using Reading Plus's evidence-based adaptive technology. Reading Plus accurately assesses your students' skills gaps and places them on a personalised learning pathway, built to accelerate their strengths and improve on their areas for development. You can try the programme with a free 4-week pilot today. Search Reading Solutions UK to find their website and request your free pilot today.
How can you show your students the opportunities that await them? How can you fuel their aspirations and motivate them to achieve? Futurum Careers provides a wealth of stimulating resources aimed at encouraging 14 to 19-year-olds to pursue careers in STEM and SHAPE. We help you to show your students what they can aim for and how. From articles to activity sheets, animations to podcasts, all our resources align with Gatsby benchmarks and are free for you and your students to download. Visit futurumcareers.com and subscribe today. Futurum Careers, helping teachers to inspire the next generation.
Get set for the year ahead with the Bloomsbury Education Back to School sale. Save 30% on all Bloomsbury education books until 30th September. From the very best in research-led practice to trusted advice on inclusivity, behaviour and curriculum design, we've got something for everyone. Visit bloomsbury.com/B2S sale to shop now and save 30%. Bloomsbury Education, books for every step of your teaching journey.
Teachers, mark your calendars for BetUK 2025, the world's biggest EdTech event. Join over 30,000 educators at the Excel London from the 22nd to the 24th of January. Discover the latest EdTech innovations, network with peers and access hundreds of hours of CPD. Did we mention it's 100% free for educators? Whether you're looking for inspiration or practical tools to enhance your teaching, BET has it all. Don't miss this opportunity to shape the future of education. Register today at uk.betshow.com. That's uk.betshow.com.
So if you have spent the last 40 minutes hearing me talk about dual coding and thinking, oh no, this is not something that I do in my practice, and now I've got to go back through all of my lessons and change everything that I do in order to incorporate this theory, please don't, because that's actually not necessary. It is really easy to incorporate dual coding into your lessons, into your classroom. And you will only need to make very small tweaks to your existing practice. And realistically, this is something that you probably do anyway. Because one of the reasons that VAC was so pervasive is because it kind of accidentally led to dual coding. Back when we were training and we had to justify on our lesson plans how we were catering for our visual, auditory and kinesthetic learners, we were including all of those things in our one lesson. And what we were doing, even though we may not have realized it, was we were performing dual coding. So our children were learning, and it looked like they were learning because we were giving them their preferred style. But what we were actually doing was producing dual codes, which meant that everybody could access the information much, much better. So you are probably already dual coding, even if you don't realize it. The simplest way to dual code is to combine verbal explanations with an image or a diagram on your whiteboard. So when you are talking about something, have a picture of it up on the board as well. That's something that we tend to do because many of us still like to use PowerPoint. I know that I do. I like PowerPoint essentially as my lesson plan. Because I know my content, and so I like my slides because they just kind of structure my lesson through. So we quite often have those things already. Just make sure, as I alluded to before, that your PowerPoint is clean. make sure that the information that is there, make sure that the diagrams that are there are the focus, and that you're not detracting with too much information. Now, I hate that. I did a presentation on Tuesday, and I incorporated my Bitmoji into my PowerPoint slides because I still like to use my Bitmoji. I'm still stuck in 2021 when we were all using them on our slides. But I incorporated him, and I was aware that from a cognitive load perspective, that wasn't the best thing to do, because it did add this extra thing that my delegates were processing. But it was also fun, and this is something that I still struggle with, is getting that balance between having something on a slide because it's necessary, and then having something on a slide because you want a bit of life in your lessons, you want a bit of personality in your lessons. I like to be a little bit silly, and popping my Bitmoji up on the screen helps me to achieve that. And so I do think it is about finding your own personal balance with these things. And of course, we're doing this already. We're having the verbal and visual explanations because it's one of Rosenshine's principles. Rosenshine talks about how we should be breaking down our information into small, understandable chunks, and having the visual with your lecture, with your explanation, is one way that we do that. Something that is worth thinking about when it comes to dual coding is not having writing up on your board when you are giving a verbal explanation. So don't read from your PowerPoint. We know not to do that anyway because that's boring. But also don't have a paragraph up on the board and then while your students are reading that paragraph, summarize it. Because both of those use your auditory loop, and so that is cognitively overloading. So what you want to do, if you've got that going on, if you have got something that you want your students to read, but then you also want to summarize it, you give them a couple of minutes to read it first while you sit in silence. Then when they are done reading, you call their attention back to you, or you change whatever is on the board, and then you can summarize it. And then they will remember it better because they've had both. They've had both. Okay, they've had the two explanations. All right, but try to avoid overloading. And it's that one, I think, that is the hardest to remember, because your instinct, you are probably better people than me. My instinct is to say, well, having the paragraph up on the board is the visual, and then me explaining it is the auditory, but that's not how it works. Don't think about it, I suppose, as visual and auditory, which is ironic considering those have been the terms that I've used this whole hour. Think about it as words and pictures. And when you are doing your words, and I don't like saying this as a word person, but when you are doing your words, you've got to choose between the written word and the spoken word, because the written word is not a picture. When you are using your PowerPoint or your Prezi or whatever it is that you might be using, don't talk through the slides that display the text. Sometimes you need to. Sometimes you need to have text up on the screen throughout the duration of your own explanation. But again, give them time to study it before you start talking. Highlighting key points adds to your non-verbal cue of your explanation, which takes advantage of dual coding. Sometimes, if you ask pupils to write something down in silence, before they have heard your explanation, that can seem the wrong way round. If you have given them something up on the board to read, and then you ask them to write before you've had a chance to explain it, that can feel strange. But that does help to reduce that cognitive load. So again, just think about the structure of your presentation. Think about, is it necessary to do the traditional, I do all of my bit up at the front and then the children write stuff down and then they do their worksheets? Or can you switch it so that there's an explanation up on the board that the children read, then they write it down, they write down their notes, then you explain it, then maybe they can go back to their notes and make any alterations that they might need to make based on your explanation, then they can do their worksheet. The other advantage to that, of course, is with attention span, because what you're doing is you are reducing the amount of time that they have to spend on one task, which is more likely to keep them on task, less likely for them to start chatting to their friends while they're writing, which of course is using the verbal mode twice, and so is not helping anything to go in. And I think that itself is quite an interesting way, if you like to use kind of learning as a behavior management tool, that's an interesting way to get them to think about what happens when they're talking while they're working. Because not only does it stop them from working, we're used to saying to them, you are distracting yourself from your work, you're distracting your peer from your work. But it also means that they're not actually taking in the conversation that they're having, because part of their attention is on their work. So if their conversation is that important to them, they are actually better off waiting until the work is done so that they can give the conversation their full attention. And again, as a teacher, it might seem unnatural to be spinning it that way and to say, actually, you should do your work first because you are not giving this conversation the full attention it deserves. You're not processing the conversation properly. But the conversation is important to them. Communicating with their friends is important to them. And, we shouldn't undermine that. We shouldn't brush that under the carpet, but we can use it to our advantage. Infographics are also a really good way to give visual representations that combine both the verbal and non-verbal information. So infographics are actually, theoretically, the perfect way to present information, the perfect way to dual code things. Now, I have found infographics really helpful at A-level. In MFL at A-level, we learn about different family structures, for example. And our pupils need to know, like, the divorce rate in target language countries. They should know the percentage of marriages that are same-sex marriages versus opposite-sex marriages. All of those sorts of things. Lots of social issues we talk about. And I found that infographics have been the best way to get my pupils to remember that information. And infographics are great because they are everywhere on the internet. I reckon you could type in just about any topic into Google or whatever search engine you use with the word infographic and something will come up. So take advantage of those because they are already made. They are quite easy to make, to be fair. If you can't find one on your topic, they are quite fast to put together. But it's highly likely that they are already made. They are printable most of the time. They look great stuck in a book. If one of the things that you are doing is having to justify everything that you are doing, sticking an infographic into a book looks really good. And they are the best way for our students to process information. And this is quite interesting, when we think about knowledge organizers, they kind of do the same thing. I think one of the reasons that knowledge organizers were so trendy a couple of years ago is because they function in the same way an infographic does. They combine the words and the pictures to help that process. There are, of course, some negatives to dual coding. The big one that I want to talk about, because I am aware we've only got a couple of minutes left of our show today, is the misalignment between modalities. And this is the one that we've got to be careful of when we are planning our lessons. And this isn't a fault of the theory. This is quite often a fault of us as the teacher misunderstanding the theory. So remember that for dual coding to work effectively, the visual and the verbal information must complement each other. If they don't align, or if they convey conflicting messages, it can lead to either confusion or a failure to integrate the information. So again, to reference that observation that I had, I liked the little lady in the corner popping up with the Japanese alphabet because it was fun. I thought it was quite good because it was just reminding children of the hiragana, but it had nothing to do with my lesson. It was conflicting information. And so it was stopping that information from being processed. So dual coding is not about making your PowerPoint look pretty. It's not even about finding a diagram that complements what you're talking about. It's about having the exact same information in two different modes. And again, that's why when we discussed this picture book on my course at university, that's why that was so interesting, because it was conflicting information, or at least it wasn't complementary information. And so while we thought that was good for adding texture to the story, what it didn't do was to help us to remember the story at all. Whereas a more simple picture book does help to do that. One of the other negatives can be a student over-reliance on one modality. And this is why we need to stop getting them to take the VAC tests. Because our students will always take the path of least resistance. Let's be honest, that's what they do. So if you tell a student that they are a visual learner, they will latch onto visual modality and will then ignore the auditory modality because they think that they're not an auditory learner, so they don't need it. What we need to be doing is teaching our learners, especially if in our schools we claim that metacognition plays a big part in our instruction. We need to teach our learners how their brains work. We need to teach our learners that dual coding, that both modalities, is the most effective way of getting them to remember things, so that they don't over-rely on one mode, so that they don't focus only on the diagram and neglect the written explanation, because that causes incomplete learning. One of the other issues, and again, I was about to say that this is out of our control. It's not, but it does require kind of cross-department thinking and a real focus within a school, is visual literacy. How well do our learners interpret visual information? Can they actually read a pie chart? Are they good with those graphs? I can't remember what they're called, but those graphs that are represented by like stick people. And, one stick person represents 500 people. So do they know then that half of a stick person represents 250 people? How good actually are they at decoding visual information? Because if they actually can't understand the picture that they are seeing, if they can't decode that picture, then they're actually not getting dual coding at all, because they're not understanding what they're seeing. They're only getting the auditory, they're only getting the words and not the pictures. So think very carefully about your class What is their visual literacy like? Do they understand the pictures that you are showing them? Because if they don't, then it's not dual coded. Remember that this isn't about what we're doing as the teachers, not really. It's about what they're doing as the learners. It's about how their brains are processing the information. That's kind of what our job is. It's not about us, it's about them. And if they are not processing that visual information, then the information is not being dual coded. There we go. That brings us to 10:30. So thank you very, very much for listening to the show today. I hope you found it as interesting as I did in doing the research. I am our only show on Teachers Talk Radio today. I'm sure many of you are off at the Teachers Talk History event today, so you will be tuning into that at different points throughout the day. And if you are, I hope you have a great time. If you are not and you are looking for other shows, of course, you can go back through the archives. We have a lot of good shows coming up tomorrow and throughout the rest of the week, so do tune into those, and I will see you next Saturday for our next breakfast together. Thank you all very, very much, and goodbye.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.